to the 40K Fireside podcast, where we discuss everything to do with competitive Warhammer 40K with your hosts Vic VJ and David Gaylord. Hello everyone, welcome back to 40K Fireside. It's your host Vic with you today, and I'm going to be doing an Aeldari tactical deep dive on the best ways and the best strategies to tackle the mirror. I think the mirror is going to become a lot more common. Aeldari are quite popular, they're pretty strong at the moment, so trying to formulate a few strategies, a few tips, learn a few tricks that can help you to get through that game, I think is going to be very useful to improve your success at competitive events or even at just your local games if you're playing against another Aeldari player. Now, the reason I'm doing this video is someone on our Discord asked me the question, Vic, do you have any ideas on how best I can approach the Aeldari mirror? And actually, I hadn't really thought about it enough to give a proper answer. And I think just out there, in terms of seeking knowledge and trying to get better with this army, there's not really much out there on how to deal with the mirror. There's loads out there on how to deal with hordes, manage your pressure. I've done loads of videos on how to kill big things, how to beat marines, all the strategies, movement tactics. But the game against Eldar is just so uniquely different to any other matchup when it's an Aeldari mirror. I thought, let me make an entire video on this, try and break it down into all the different steps that are required to get the maximum level of success out of your Aeldari mirror. Another catalyst to me making this video is that I did go to the LGT this weekend. I had an amazing time, huge tournament, 1,100 players, and in round 4 I got to play against Manny Chima, who was also playing Aeldari, and we had a mirror match. I went into the game just using core concepts, but actually after playing against him, I did learn a lot of things that I felt he was doing really well in the game that kind of helped him to have a really good chance, but then a few things went my way and I had a few advantages. Now, in terms of that particular game, I've got the score up on the screen right here. There were two main things which kind of went my way for me to win this game. One was I definitely had a little bit of a list building advantage. My list was better in the mirror than Manny's list, and that definitely showed through across the game. The second one and the win condition for me is that my momentum and my tempo, because my list was better, did end up allowing me to get a little bit ahead of him on resources as the game went on. Now, going first can be a huge advantage in the Aeldari mirror, and I love the fact that in this game, for the purposes of science and this video, I did not go first. Manny went first, so he had that advantage, and despite that, there were some strategies that we kind of discussed and that became apparent as the game went on the ways to best approach the Aeldari mirror. Now, in terms of win condition, I think the key thing you're looking for when you're playing the Aeldari mirror is something called tempo, or otherwise known as momentum in the game. Now, this is a very abstract kind of concept in Warhammer 40k, but if you want to break it down into something practical, something you can see on the board, it's the idea that you always seem to have a little bit more resources than your opponent. Now, the Aeldari mirror is very, very unique, and the reason for that is because the lethality of your units is so much higher in this game compared to most games against most other armies. Aeldari units are extremely fragile. They are really susceptible to your own output. Stuff like warp spiders, swooping hawks, dire avengers, even your close combat weapons are very good into other Aeldari units. Our fire dragons are brilliant into the vehicles as well and really get through them even with a -1 to wound on the wave serpent. So the Aeldari mirror is unique because of the extreme lethality between your units versus their units. Your range, your threat range is unique as well. Aeldari have the longest threat range for being able to apply output out of any of the armies in the game. Warp spiders just being able to move 26 and shoot around a corner is huge threat range. Because of that, that is something Aeldari hate. Aeldari hate playing against things that deep strike really close into them, apply threat around walls and really get to you. What you want to be doing is kind of getting to them without them being able to reach you. You staying out of their threat range, you can't do that in an Aeldari mirror. Also, very uniquely in the Aeldari mirror, because of the extreme threat range and the high lethality, is that you often get 1-for-1 trading. which is something you don't normally get. Normally, Aeldari need to combine multiple units to kill their target. Even something as simple as 5 Space Marines often can require backup output because you have to make sure that you complete the job. And the Aeldari output from a single unit is maybe on average does just about get through the 5 Marines, but it's only just about an average, so half the time you're failing it. Whereas against other Aeldari, actually your units become really good at killing an entire or more than one of the opponent's units, so you can kind of trade up a little bit. On top of the lethality in the range, that makes for a very interesting, high-paced game where things are just dying absolutely everywhere. So let's try and break this down a little bit and focus in a little bit more on our win conditions and how we're going to get that momentum and tempo that allows us to actually win the game. If we consider the very first point that we made about being able to do 1-for-1 or 1-for-2 trading, where we kill 2 enemy units or more than one with one of our units, the way that we can get tempo in these games and get momentum is essentially in the early game killing more of the opponent's units than they're killing of ours at a quicker rate as well. If we get to turn 3 and we still have a few output pieces that are safe, behind walls, opponent not able to engage, inside transports, opponents not able to destroy stuff in the transports, then the game is going to spiral and you're going to end up with a score like what we had in the game between me and Manny, where it actually looked like I got a really, really big win, when actually the game was very close, but I just got the momentum advantage towards the end of the game, where I had a few more resources. I still had my Falcon with some Dark Reapers in it. I had Morgan Ra in there, and Manny no longer had his transports. Everything was on the board, being charged, tagged, etc. And I was still able to have my output pieces doing a little bit of damage. All you need is 2 units, maybe 3 units more than your opponent going into turn 3 that can actually do damage, and you will win the game. Now, how are we going to achieve it? Let's try and break this down as best as we can into macro, micro, and list building. Let's do list building first, because I think that was the biggest advantage I had versus Manny in the game that we played. Now, list building advantage depends on the units you take that are uniquely good in the mirror or uniquely bad in the mirror. Let's take Fire Dragons, for example. Manny in this game, he had 10, 5, 5 Fire Dragons, so 20 Fire Dragons. Now, Fire Dragons are brilliant into vehicles. 5 Fire Dragons are going to kill a Falcon or a Wave Serpent, but actually, the Fire Dragons are really weak in the Aeldari mirror. So if you are considering that Aeldari are going to be really popular in the meta, then, I would be very careful with the number of Fire Dragons you take. I know a lot of our American listeners love following what Jack Hobbs is doing with 20 Fire Dragons. Let me tell you, the 20 Fire Dragons is not what you want in the mirror. You'd much rather the 220 points that you've used in Fire Dragons is put into something with much more high volume output, or MSU. So list building wise, the things you don't want are low volume stuff like Fire Dragons. You ideally don't want very big units. For example, Manny had 2 units of 10 Swooping Hawks and 1 unit of 5 Swooping Hawks. That's not ideal in the mirror. A unit of 5 Swooping Hawks is able to pretty much do the job of what 10 Swooping Hawks are able to do in the mirror. So essentially, Manny could have had a lot more units. So the 2 things you want to avoid: low volume units, really large units. And the things you want are MSU. You want loads of many small units, or multiple small units, depending on who you ask, in order to get as much 1-for-1 trading against your opponent. You also want your units to be as fast as possible. The single best list building unit is Warp Spiders. Sometimes when I talk to other Aeldari players and we're kind of discussing the mirror a little bit, we often talk about the Spider War. Whoever ends the game with more spiders, because Warp Spiders are able to apply their threat at such a long range, kill an enemy unit, set up Overwatch, and then potentially kill another enemy unit, or at least limit the space that the opponent can move into. Warp Spiders are very, very powerful in the mirror. It's another list building advantage I had versus Manny, where he only had 2 units of Warp Spiders, but I had the full 3 units of Warp Spiders. Huge, huge advantage. Another one is looking slightly outside of the box. For my LGT list, I did run a unit of Striking Scorpions uniquely, particularly for the mirror. I think Striking Scorpions are brilliant in the mirror. High volume, early game threat. They move forward into spaces, hold objectives. They do an excellent fight on death. It's actually really awkward to dig them out of spaces. If they do send, say, Janezar, some Howling Banshees, try and engage with the Striking Scorpions, then move back onto an objective to get to safety. With a bit of fight on death action, you can really shred that Howling Banshee unit. They're very, very awkward for other Eldar players to deal with. And in the game versus Manny, my 5 Striking Scorpions moved forward. They created a threatening position. And then after a little bit, actually, you know what? Let me switch over to TTS and show you that. My 5 Striking Scorpions deployed very aggressively, exactly 9 inches away from Manny's deployment zone. They went here. And then when Manny got first turn, they just tucked right back into the very corner of this area so that Manny would really struggle to get an angle into them. He'd have to come really, really acute to get an angle, and his Howling Banshees would have to charge in. They could charge from that side of the wall perfectly fine, don't need to stay an inch away. But if I fight on death, I'm going to end up taking a big toll, a big reward out of that particular interaction by getting rid of one of his fight first units. But what actually happened as the game went on is Manny was not able to engage with the Striking Scorpions in that area. Eventually, in about turn 3, he had 10 Swooping Hawks, which were playing in the middle of the board, doing something. The Striking Scorpions went in and killed all 10 Swooping Hawks. What a phenomenal trade there for the Striking Scorpions, and they played the whole game just being an absolute nuisance. Props to Striking Scorpions. I am a huge fan of including them in the list, particularly for the mirror. Now let's move on to our strategy and what we're going to do in the game practically to make things a little bit better for us. It's actually a good time to stick to Tabletop Simulator. So on this particular map, the one I played against Manny in LGT, this is Crucible. We've got nice big ruins in the middle. One thing that I would look out for in UKTC terrain and WTC terrain is the ability to grab a bit of plunging fire. Warp Spiders being able to jump onto the second floor or third floor of ruins is very, very powerful. Let me grab a unit of Warp Spiders. Fantastic. So let's say we had a unit of Warp Spiders over here. And with 24 inches, we very easily, this is 20 inches to get up onto this wall. Now that is right on the edge of deployment zone. It's a major staging area for the opponent's army. Imagine a unit of Warp Spiders up here shooting down into the space with plunging fire. They'll get AP2 ignore cover, which is a big breakpoint against 3+ armor save, 5+ invulnerable Aeldari models. And you can kill a unit and still have plunging fire for the Overwatch here if the opponent tries to move into this space, which is obviously a very important space that they would want to move into. You can also set it up so that you have Overwatch going backwards into the middle of the board. Any kind of little situations like this where you can set up your Warp Spiders to do very good Overwatch threat, I think is extremely strong. Alright, so the second one is one that Manny actually did beautifully here, which is going to be playing a little more defensively. Now, there are 2 options here when you see a board like this. You can deploy your entire army on the line and get ready to really engage with the opponent. But actually the correct strategy, which Manny identified really beautifully, is to be aggressive with a small element of your army and be very defensive with the rest of your army. Because you only have one instance of Ignore Overwatch in your army, really your ability to activate deep into the opponent's army, especially in the very early game, is going to be quite limited on the number of units you can use for that. So what we want to do is use the lethality and the range and speed of our army to create a situation where we get an early game momentum lead by trading one of our units for multiple of the opponent's units. A good example of this is using Lycus's unit. So we've got Lycus with 5 Warp Spiders and the Power Blade Exarch in the unit, who by the way is incredible. So I know there's a little bit of talk about dropping this guy for a double gun guy. Do not do that. The profile of 10 attacks, 4-2-1 twin linked lethal hits on this particular unit is phenomenal. And if we're considering that the Aeldari mirror is going to be more popular, that is a very good profile in the Aeldari mirror, because it'll allow you to do what I'm just about to say here, which is this one unit can ignore Overwatch, move 24 inches into this space over here, and then shoot something, potentially split fire and shoot 2 things, then charge and finish off 2 things, or charge and kill a 3rd unit. That is extremely powerful if you can pull that play off with Lycus's unit in the early game. And in this particular point, which is about being a little bit more defensive, we don't need to put anything else forward here except for Lycus's unit. So we only put Lycus's unit at the front, and you hope that your opponent does kind of the opposite of what you're doing. They maybe put Lycus's unit forward, but they also put 2 or 3 other units forward in this space. If you save your deployment a little bit later, so for example, Manny did this beautifully. He deployed really far back with a bunch of stuff, and I was like, okay, nice, yeah, he's got stuff really far back, so let me go a little further forward. And then he deployed near the end of his deployment with Lycus's unit further forward. Great strategy. That's worked out beautifully. So if I end up going first, I'm going to go and I'm going to kill Lycus's unit. Fine. A single unit of warp spiders may be able to do that, especially with plunging fire, but actually most of the time they're actually going to leave Lycus alive here. So my alternative option is I can send my own Lycus in over here and kill this whole unit. Perfectly fine. In that case, there is potential for you to fight on death with Lycus and the Powerblade Exarch, and potentially even go through the opponent's Lycus's unit for free. But regardless, you'll be able to move into this space and trade for Lycus's unit. So what this does is, if you go first against an opponent that is deployed poorly, you'll be able to get a big momentum lead. If you go second, your opponent will not be able to get a big momentum lead into you. If you go first and your opponent is deployed correctly, you still have the advantage of being able to stage really nicely further forward, and you can still pick at the edges a little bit if you want to. Very, very interesting. So yeah, correct deployment, in my opinion, is single unit forward. Maybe you can put the Wave Serpent here if you want to. And then you want to kind of be a little bit more defensive with your faster pieces so that they can follow in the turn after. Not everyone is going to have watched this video, so I'm hoping you will have this advantage when you get into your Aeldari mirror. But maybe every single Aeldari player in the world watches this and everyone does the same thing, in which case we are down for some really exciting close games. Let's go for a little microstrategy point here, which is the way that you use your infiltrators. It is extremely powerful to get the first drop in the Aeldari mirror. Let me try and give you an example here. And let's take a unit of rangers. Let's say we don't have striking scorpions in the list. The unit of rangers have a number of different options on the places that they can deploy here. So they could deploy up over behind this ruin, be a little bit of a nuisance with their reactive move, hide from angles. They could go over into this space, kind of engage with the opponent's expansion objective. Now, in my opinion, actually the single most important thing to do is to try and defend areas that you can get threatened. So in this case, because you're dropping first, you're going to prevent your opponent from doing that. So I'm going to make sure whatever I do, I'm not going to let my opponent infiltrate or scout to prevent me from getting plunging fire here. So the points over here where they can go, let's say this area would be where your Wave Serpent could get in and the Fire Dragons could shoot their Wave Serpent. You want to make sure they can't deploy there. So you're going to measure 9 inches from the best space that they can get to, and you're going to make sure you've got at least one ranger here. Perfect. Now they can't defend this space with scout moves or with infiltrate moves. And then you're going to just stretch out with your 2 inches and go as far across as you can to try and reduce the space that the opponent can infiltrate, because, you know, in an ideal world, maybe you can stop them from getting behind this wall so easily. So that would probably be my ideal one. Obviously, there's an infinite number of situations and scenarios that you could play out here, so I can't kind of guide you through every single one, but the things you want to look out for are denying your opponent the space that they would want to protect their army from. So if you can get Lycus over into this area and you need to be able to stand on this particular piece of ruin, that's the ruin you want to make sure your opponent doesn't infiltrate into. So next one, let's go on to another macro strategy, which is really interesting in the mirror, which is a lot of list building now is using aspect host, war host, and getting a falcon into the list. So the falcon is really interesting. For example, on UKTC, you can get some pretty wild lines down the side here. On turn 1, you can be kind of all the way up here, and you can shoot down across the opponent's deployment zone. It's actually really easy to create, even on GW. And also on UKTC terrain. So the Wave Serpent with Morgan Ra and the Reapers, I think brilliant unit. And then obviously if you have the Dire Avengers as well, you can play kind of tuck into spaces and fire and fade backwards and forwards. But I would say for the Aeldari Mirror, one threat that you produce in the game, which is not as useful in other games, is a rapid ingress threat. So in the game against Manny, he put his Falcon on the board. I put my Falcon in rapid ingress. And the sequence of the way the game played out was that he ended up throwing the Falcon over here and getting an angle into a unit of Warp Spiders that were tucked in here, shooting with the Dire Avengers and then moving back into the Falcon, and the Falcon was stuck in this space. It was really easy for me to then follow up, kill the Falcon, kill Asserman and the Dire Avengers. The way I played it though, which gave me a big advantage, was I played it off rapid ingress. By the middle part of the game, turn 2, Manny was not really able to screen fully, so I was able to get in about here. Once I got into this space, let me put the Falcon actually there. I was able to move the Falcon all the way over to here, get the Dark Reapers out, and shoot into some Howling Banshees and Jane'Zar who were sitting over here. Cleared the unit, split fire, and shot the actual Dark Reapers into another unit, cleared the unit. And then the Falcon shot at something, cleared some models. Awesome combination. And that's the power of the rapid ingress threat, because it allows you to do a multiple trade. Lets you go for the one unit, killing 2 or 3 units, which is exactly what you need, and that was the killing blow in this game. So at this stage of the game, with the Falcon now re-embarked with the Dark Reapers, that's a pretty fiddly situation to deal with once your other assets are really whittled down. So I really like that. Keep it off the board, because let's imagine it is on the board and it's deployed there. Pretty easy to chuck 5 Fire Dragons and remove the Falcon early games, which is not really nice. And also if you have the Falcon and the Wave Serpent here, pretty easy for the Fire Dragons to come split fire and kill both, especially if they get the first drop and prevent you from defending yourself. I know this is a UKTC example, but really guys, these theories work exactly the same in GW, so it is a singles kind of concept. Cool. Let's keep going. We are going to talk about a little bit more microstrategy. One thing which is really interesting in the Eldar mirror, especially if it's an aspect host mirror, aspect host doesn't have a fallback and shoot. So what you'll get a lot of is, for example, these ranges. If they were deployed here and I went first, these ranges are running in. They are charging something, they're tagging up a Wave Serpent, they're just existing in space and causing an absolute nuisance. Always look for opportunities to do that. Your units of 5 Swooping Hawks are brilliant at moving 16 inches, throwing their grenades, shooting something, and charging and tagging something. Always look for those plays. Don't be too quick to advance with the Swooping Hawks. They're brilliant at charging and maybe even killing a bunch of models in the Aeldari Mirror, but at the very least they're really tagging things up. Now obviously this doesn't work against Warhost or against Seer Council who have a teleport, but it's still annoying. It's making them spend a CP. It's also picking up some of their models during the fight phase, which is an extra phase of output. I really like it. It also pushes back any threat that they have, and it also forces them to deal with stuff which is standing directly in front of them. I'm a big fan of just charging everything all the time whenever you can when you're playing Eldar. Near the end of the game against Manny, he had his 10 Fire Dragons here after the Wave Serpent got shot. They ended up reactive moving and moving away while I was trying to pick away at them, but I did manage to make a really nice long bomb charge and just ended up tagging them up for the middle part of the game, which kind of removed them from the game. Awesome. Let's do our last microstrategy. So this is one that actually applies to every single game, but I think it's very, very important in the Aeldari Mirror. Our win condition is momentum and tempo, holding on to our resources better than our opponent's able to, killing our opponent's resources better than they're able to. And one very important way of doing that is by being extremely tight with your reactive moves and how you use terrain. So, for example, let's say we're shooting at something which is tucked in just behind this wall over here. You have an option. You know, your Warp Spiders, they could move all the way over here and shoot it. They can get a few different options. What I would recommend, though, is that you want to hug walls and be as tight to walls as possible. So one option is to go over into this space. One option is to go over like this. One option is to play really tight along the side here. If you get shot, you get a little bit of cover. You get to reactive move back behind the wall. You want to be as tight as possible and make that as likely as possible. Sometimes the best way to do that is not to string out like this, but actually go right up against the wall and go in two lines. There we go. Perfect. just try and grab your really tight angle and then tuck back in behind the wall if you get shot. A big one for the Aeldari Mirror is that we do have the ability when an opponent falls back to move d6+1. So when you're making your pile-in, you're consolidating your tag moves, consider less about wrapping the opponent and more about where your reactive move is going to take you. So ideally, you know, if an opponent's Wave Serpent's over here, you want to try and get into the space where you can maybe get back behind a ruin. Really, really powerful. It can really scupper the opponent's plans or force them to use units that they don't want to be using in quite an aggressive fashion. So yeah, I mean, piece together all of these things, guys. It's a super skill-based matchup, but it only takes you doing one or two things differently to your opponent to be able to get the advantage against them. So I would, just to summarize, I would make sure that the key focus, the way we're winning the game, is by getting more momentum and tempo than the opponent. We have to be aware that they have lethality and 1-for-1 trading, and any situations where we can do 1-for-2 trading of their units is situations where we're going to gain tempo and what we're really aiming for to try and win the game. Then once we've got the momentum advantage, we can get nice, really big scores like what we had at LGT. And then in terms of your macro strategy, you want to be a little bit on the defensive side so that you can mitigate the first turn advantage. If your opponent goes first, you don't want them to absolutely obliterate your army. You want them to just pick away at a single target. And if you go first, you can only really use one resource. So make the most of that resource and let that resource be the only thing standing further forward. When you're actually playing the game, be really tight, careful, and use your reactive moves to try and gain game-winning advantages. If you do have anything which you can put into rapid ingress or deep strike, it's extremely powerful in the Aeldari Mirror. And the last secret tip, if you have any characters like Fuegan, it's nice to remove them from their units so that they're acting a bit solo, so you get one more unit for your MSU list building, which is going to give you an advantage in the game. That's everything, guys. I know that is loads of information. I would love to hear from you in the comments about your ideas for the Aeldari Mirror, how you've got on, the challenges you've faced. I will definitely read the comments and try my best to reply to them. If you do want to have a little bit more direct advice, direct answers to questions, I would highly recommend a few things. So if you join the membership side, there is a deep dive of my LGT list that I took. If you join at Phoenix Lord level for YouTube membership, you can join the Discord, which has an extremely active Aeldari section. Definitely get involved with that, and you can ask questions directly to me or any of the other super experienced, lovely people who are in there. And third thing, if you do want to have a masterclass about playing aggressive, playing with these aspect host, war host, Seer Council lists, I've done a 4-hour masterclass on the 40kfireside.com website. You can find the link to that in the description or on the video. Make sure you check that out. That has a lot of information to get you off and running with your Aeldari army. And even if you're very experienced, I have a feeling there will be a few things in there that will help elevate your game. I hope this was a unique learning experience for you guys, because there really isn't much information on the Aeldari Mirror out there. Aeldari is a super popular army. And as always, thank you all for popping in. I will see you all next time by the fireside. Thank you for listening to the 40K Fireside. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, drop us a comment, check out the YouTube members area, and we look forward to seeing you again next time by the fireside.